It happens quickly.
A significant flooding event developing right now in the western half of Houston and Harris County.
Sometimes it's just a few neighborhoods affected.
Clear Lake City Hospital had a graveyard of flooded cars, including a fire department truck.
At other times, like with Hurricane Harvey, it's the entire Houston area. For the past 5 years, the weather bullseye has been on the Bayou City. Which leads to the question, are the storms and the floods getting worse? And is this a trend that will continue? We dig into the data and talk to those affected as we look into the future of flooding in Houston.
The Future of Flooding is sponsored by Kroger. Kroger sponsors the Hurricane Tracker because we care about your safety. American Risk Insurance. Large enough to compete, small enough to care. GOYA Foods, making it easy for you to be prepared. And Generator Supercenter, the standby power people.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog. It's no secret that in recent years we've seen an increase in floods all across Houston, starting with the Memorial Day flood of 2015, building up to the flood of all floods of Hurricane Harvey in 2017.
We've seen Houston have more heavy rain recently than a lot of other parts of the state. If you look at it on a county-by-county basis, the increase of heavy rainfall in Houston exceeds that of all but a handful of counties across Texas as a whole.
Our state climatologist, Dr. John Nielsen Gammon, says rainfall overall in Texas has increased by 5 to 10% in the last century. But the question is why?
Well, anytime you have sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico that are higher than they used to be, you'll have more moisture flowing into Texas than there used to be. So a given storm will produce larger amounts of rain.
The changing rainfall patterns over Texas prompted the federal government to rewrite the 100-year rainfall standards this past fall, but the increases were not evenly distributed.
There was basically a belt from Houston and Beaumont across the state to Austin and San Antonio and Del Rio, where the increases were fairly substantial.
Since the 1960s, the benchmark for a 100-year rainfall in Houston is 13 inches in 24 hours. Now that is considered a 1 in 25-year rainfall. 18 inches is the new 100-year standard. That's close to a 40% increase to the standard for our area. Hurricane Harvey hit that mark and more.
Friday, August 25th, Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Rockport. The system moved towards Houston and basically stalled. Massive rain fell in wave after wave.
Other storms are here, Harvey's here. In terms of the amount of rainfall over a significant area, Harvey is the clear winner. Nothing on the West Coast, nothing on the Gulf Coast, nothing in the Southeast United States comes close to matching what Harvey did.
Dickinson was under siege. The Weather Prediction Center measured over 50 inches of rain in the area. The Dickinson Bayou flowed over its banks and into homes.
On the outside, a flood line that was about there's right below this edge.
James Flex lived there for 26 years. He and his family have been through many hurricanes. Their home never flooded until Harvey.
It was a moving lake. It was like rapids. It was probably a 20-mile-an-hour current in the water.
As water rushed into their home, James knew he had to get his wife and his 2 little chihuahuas out and onto higher ground.
So I knew the highest elevation that I could get to was the Bayou Bridge by Paul Hopkins Park. So my goal when we left here was to get to that bridge.
With water rising up to the bridge, James reached out to his son for help. On the other side of the bayou, Paula and Bill Gaffey had to move fast. Their home was taking on more and more water. Paula says they had a similar experience one other time during Tropical Storm Claudette.
We flooded in '79. We had 30 inches of rain in the house at that time.
This is the water that afternoon, Sunday.
Remembering that time, the couple knew they needed help and called their daughter Lisa.
They were in the attic from 2 a.m. on Sunday morning until about 2 to 3 p.m. the next Sunday afternoon. And my sister and some friends came in a boat.
James Flex was stuck on a bridge for several hours and worried. He just hoped to see his loved ones again.
Well, that was Sunday morning that we got rescued.
Finally, his son Jimmy arrived with a boat and was able to rescue James and many of their neighbors. When the Flex family returned to their home 5 days later, debris was everywhere. and most of their belongings were ruined or gone.
The debris was probably 2 or 3 feet high against the fence and probably went to the middle of the street.
The family faced the tough decision so many others also had to make. Do they rebuild or leave? They also wondered, could this happen again?
Thought of another Harvey scare you enough to move your family away?
I don't know what scare it is. I'm a Marine. The concern was I didn't want to lose all my personal stuff.
It was this Marine mentality that brought his family together to step in and rebuild his forever home.
My mom and dad, especially my dad, who is a Marine, who had been through Vietnam, and he's always helped people his whole life. And we were the ones that had to come in and try to help put him back together.
You know, if we're gonna have to rebuild it and you're gonna live here, let's do it so this is your forever home.
Well, I haven't seen these in a while. This was the truck. That was, the water had actually gone down some by then.
Looking back at pictures of all the storm damage, Lisa Gaffey said her parents' decision to rebuild instead of leaving their Dickinson home was tough.
The eeriest thing was walking in on that Wednesday after the storm.
But one she's glad they made.
I saw just a resilience and being able to bounce back from this. I don't know if I would be able to do the same thing. And it was amazing to watch.
The Gaffey family survived 2 of the biggest weather events in U.S. and even world history, Hurricane Harvey and Tropical Storm Claudette.
This is Ed Brandon, Eyewitness Weather. I'm standing on a virtually deserted, except for emergency vehicles, Gulf Freeway. We are on top of the South Belt. That's the street below us. You can tell it's flooded, and we're looking toward the Sagemont addition. The remnants of Tropical Storm Claudette finally moved over the Houston area.
Tropical Storm Claudette often gets overlooked, but back in 1979, that system set the U.S. 24-hour rainfall record in Alvin.
This is, in fact, the original rain gauge that was out here in 1979 and mounted on the same fence post, and it was validated. People came out from Washington and validated that it was accurate.
All during the night, John Davison's father went to his fence to check, make measurements, and empty the rain gauge. Then he would do it all over again when it filled back up with water. When the rain finally stopped, a record-breaking 42 inches of rain fell in just 24 hours. Now, Alvin is a very flat town. That much rain put the city under 2 feet of water. More than 80% of Alvin homes flooded. Kim Holcott was 9 years old at the time and remembers it well.
We were having fun, my brother, my cousin, and I, and in the middle of the night, I remember my dad coming in and waking us up saying we're leaving. And I remember stepping out onto the floors of our home and there was water all over. And we come to find out later, 14 inches had flooded our home.
Imagine this. It's pouring rain. The storm is ongoing. There's 6 feet of water in the street. And with this being such a flat neighborhood, there's only one house in the area to go to. And that's the only house with a second floor.
I remember specifically whenever we were going down to that house, I was on my dad's back and had a piggyback ride, which for a 9-year-old, that was pretty exciting, and this is kind of cool.
Time has a way of softening memories, but Kim never forgot just how dire the situation really was. She recalls several adults and kids all cramming into one floor in one house. They came up with a rescue plan.
We waited all night. We heard helicopters. Every time we heard a helicopter, we would grab towels and we would go to the windows of that 2-story home and be waving those towels out there to try to get someone to see us and to come rescue us. We only spent one night in that house. That next day, a Coast Guard helicopter did spot us and sent a boat.
Claudette, Allison, Memorial Day, Tax Day, and Harvey. Why does Southeast Texas seem to attract stalled out or slow-moving storms that drop extraordinary amounts of rain?
Well, in a typical situation, high pressure sitting to our north and east, right over southeastern parts of the country, and then the system will move in the steering flow and not stop. Jet stream winds will pick it up and take it all the way to the northern United States. In the case of our 3 systems, high pressure was sitting directly north of us, and when those systems moved in, the high pressure actually blocked them like a brick wall. They stalled over us for several days, produced a tremendous amount of rain. The result, serious flooding for Southeast Texas.
Not all flooding occurs from heavy downpours from tropical systems. Sometimes the water comes from the storms to the north. we look into problems facing our rivers and reservoirs when the future of flooding continues.
Strong to severe storms in north and northeast Texas can often lead to problems down here in southeast Texas.
That the thing about a tornado, hailstorm, it comes on you and it's gone. For this, we sit and we have to wait sometimes a couple of days to see how long it's going to take the water from up north to get here.
All that rain falls into our rivers and tributaries, and that water then collects in area lakes and basins.
There's so little topography in Harris County and the Houston area. The water just has no place to go. It cannot move fast enough. So we have a little bit more relief, topographical relief in Montgomery County and some other counties of our watershed, but by the time it reaches the Lake Houston area down into Harris County, so much of that area is so flat, there's really no place for the water to move in a timely manner.
Residents who live near our rivers and lakes must be on alert for rising water. Flash flood warnings and watches are quite common across southeast Texas. That's why the San Jacinto River Authority does everything they can to stay on top of water levels.
We have 24 operations here at the dam. We have people who live on site 24 hours. We're monitoring rain gauges, stream gauges, lake level, gate positions. We have backup diesel generators in place in case we lose power.
As southeast Texas evolves from flooding events of the past, the river authorities come up with new and better preparations.
So most recently our board of directors approved a temporary seasonal lake lowering initiative, and this is a joint operation strategy with the city of Houston. And as part of our strategy, what we will do is lower Lake Conroe by up to 1 foot in the spring.
While that doesn't sound like a lot, that 1 foot can make an enormous difference in water levels and can reduce flow downstream. And when a major weather event occurs, including flash flooding, the River Authority won't have to release quite as much water, and hopefully will stop homes downstream from flooding in the best way they can. The San Jacinto River Authority oversees several rivers and tributaries from 8 area counties. They have the difficulty of deciding what to do in managing all the high water levels during fast flooding events and flash flooding.
If we're in the middle of summer and we have a 2-inch rainfall and we have 14 days of sunny weather behind us, we're not going to open the gates at max release. We're going to slowly let that water out because we know we're not going to have rain for the next 14 days. Anytime we decide on a gate position or release amount, water to be released from the lake, it's solely dependent on the amount of water coming into the reservoir. We'll also take into consideration the weather that's expected over the next 10 to 14 days.
All in all, living here in southeast Texas, knowing these areas are very prone to flooding, we have to continue to adapt and always stay updated on the weather weeks in advance and make sure we plan ahead and stay safe for that next rain event.
In 2008, the Houston area took a direct hit from Hurricane Ike. It was just a Category 2 storm, but it wiped out the small city of Gilchrist. We look back at the storm and why forecasters are changing how they rate hurricanes. That when the future of flooding returns.
Just standing where we are, you can hear the surf roaring. It's just a constant reminder about what's going to be here in just a few hours.
24 hours prior to landfall, Hurricane Ike made his presence known. The storm surge began to overtake Galveston seawall and flood the island.
You know, we've seen as many storms as I've seen over the past 30 years. It just looked different. And so we actually left that Thursday evening. We got a train of people out of here. There were probably 8 or 10 cars of us, employees and everybody, and we left that evening about 7 o'clock, which, as I understand, was a good idea because by the next morning you weren't getting out.
Ike was a high Category 2 hurricane, carrying the storm surge of a Category 4. Some areas were hit with a 20-foot wall of water.
We are the loaned vehicle right here on Highway 87 to Gilchrist and to Crystal Beach.
The small town of Gilchrist on the Bolivar Peninsula disappeared.
We got in that day and it was quite devastating. Our friends that had a place on the front row, there was nothing left but their slab. And it took us about a month before we found anything left of their home. And it was back behind us, about half a mile behind us. It had washed from the front row about a mile across the peninsula.
Hurricane Ike caused over $30 billion in damage. The storm killed over 70 people in Texas.
The house sat on 24 pilings, and what was left was 22 pilings, but no house. Absolutely no house.
Everything that was normally green and beautiful and lush was just sand. It was sand everywhere. My son accompanied us, and when he got here, he'd just come off of a raid, and he found a real valuable artifact and held it up in the air for us and said, "Oh, guess what? Mardi Gras is safe. Here's a string of beads."
Millions lost power, not for 1 or 2 days, but for a week or longer. On top of that, many lost water.
We had 6,200 water meters the day before Ike. The day after Ike, we had 1,500 that were operating. And so we had to hire lots of people just to go out and dig to see if they could find water meters. And it took about 6 months for us to get all the water from Port Bolivar to High Island turned back on again and operating.
Above the wall, the painted wall, that's a floor plate, and that's all that was left. So everything that you saw walking in downstairs as you walked up was gone. It was mud. The pilings, under the building, that's basically all that was left here. And then down at our bait camp, the marina, we have some cinder block bait tanks, and those were there by themselves.
Some in the area gave up and moved on, but many decided to rebuild.
But I'll never forget the night that we reopened and it had gotten dark. And when you're looking out of this building at night, you really can't see. The lights are on, and you don't get the view. And people walked up to my dad just repeatedly. Bosco, God, we're so glad that you're back open. We're coming back now. We're going to rebuild our house now. We didn't know what we were going to do, but it feels like nothing happened. Everything feels normal now.
People didn't want to come back. Well, the businesses didn't want to come back. So I knew that we had to, have some light at the end of the tunnel. I knew that the people had to see that the business were coming back, and vice versa. So, we just jumped in there and decided to do it, which is, tough decision.
It really is a place where everybody helps everybody else, and we also have a good time together. It's small town atmosphere, but yet you have enough wonderful things here that will make life pleasant to live here. So, no, we wouldn't give it up for anything. We like it very much, even though they're hurricanes.
Now this hurricane season, AccuWeather implemented a new real impact hurricane scale to help you better understand the true impact of an approaching storm. Consider it a supplement to the current hurricane wind scale used by the National Hurricane Center.
We don't really want to replace the Saffir-Simpson scale. The Saffir-Simpson scale is based on wind. That's all it's based on.
For example, a Category 2 hurricane like Ike simply means the estimated peak winds are between 96 and 110 miles per hour. But this tells us nothing about the impacts from the storm surge and flooding rains.
But we don't talk about a Category 5 rainfall event. We don't talk about a Category 5 maybe storm surge event. So at the AccuWeather Real Impact Index for hurricanes simply takes 4 variables and tries to use those variables to help give people a sense as to what the real threat is.
Those variables are the wind, storm surge, rainfall, and economic impacts. Consider Tropical Storm Allison. It's the only tropical storm on U.S. soil to have its name retired because of the immense amount of rain it dumped over Houston. It didn't even register on the Saffir-Simpson wind scale, but it would have rated a real impact of 5 on AccuWeather's news scale. Or take Hurricane Ike. Some survivors said they didn't evacuate because it was just a Category 2. On the new AccuWeather scale, it would have had a real impact of 4 because of the catastrophic storm surge. And then there's Harvey, which shouldn't surprise anyone for getting a real impact of 5 due to the unprecedented rainfall and economic impact on southeast Texas. There are so many variables to weather. A system moves a little farther one way and no one is affected. Moves a little another direction and you have catastrophe. And recently, Houston has been taking direct hits again and again. Is this a trend or a coincidence? The answer when the future of flooding continues.
The Future of Flooding is sponsored by Kroger. Kroger sponsors the Hurricane Tracker because we care about your safety. American Risk Insurance. Large enough to compete, small enough to care. GOYA Foods, making it easy for you to be prepared. And Generator Supercenter, the standby power people.
As we begin the newscast, the rain is coming down hard in parts of Houston.
But we're seeing a really intense thunderstorm that is not moving very much.
Early May, up to 12 inches of rain fell in a few areas around town. Cars were stranded and nerves were frazzled.
It's very bad out here! Very, very bad!
Lately, it seems like each and every year the atmosphere zeroes in on Houston and puts us underwater. It's tempting to think floods will become more frequent and intense, but state climatologist Dr. Nielsen Gammon says that's not necessarily the case.
If you look at it on a county-by-county basis, there are a lot of counties that have seen a decrease in frequency. Galveston County, for example, hasn't had the same flooding that Harris County has had. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to just pure luck. You've got floods that'll strike one place and won't happen in another place. And because they're rare, automatically some places are going to have a string of bad luck and most places won't. Harris County's had a string of bad luck.
If that's the case, we clearly hit the jackpot of bad luck with Harvey. But it could have actually been worse.
The heaviest rain wasn't in Houston. It was over in east of Houston and also over in Beaumont. So if the track had been shifted slightly to the southwest, Houston would have received more rainfall than it did. But if you look at the forecasted tracks from the National Hurricane Center, there was a period of time when the storm was forecasted to move even more slowly than it actually did. I would personally not be surprised if a slight change in Harvey's track could have produced as much as 80 to 90 inches of rain in the Houston area, which would have been absolutely ridiculous.
A recent study showed the odds of any place along the Gulf Coast getting Harvey-like rainfall occurs with a frequency of about 1 in 9,000 years. Unfortunately, that does not mean it will be another 9,000 years before another Harvey hits Houston.
It may well be something that we won't see happen again for 1,000 years, or it can happen next year because we know the atmosphere is capable of doing this and it's capable of doing worse.
Because none of us knows exactly what the future holds, we must continue to prepare for the hurricanes and floods that will inevitably come. And we'll be here with you to help you through the next storm. I'm Travis Herzog. Thanks for joining us.